We are on our Saturday morning day text. I tell you what, I was out doing some early morning watering to my lawn, and on my phone it showed up on a notice, CW Jaw Talk is live, or CW Jaw Tube is live. I'm like, what? And I realized I meant to set the start of today's day text at 7:30. But for whatever reason, I must not have saved that setting. So had to wrap things up quickly there and get in and do the show. So I apologize, I'm a couple minutes late, but that's why. All right, we're going to be continuing our reading in the book of Revelation. We're in chapter 2. If you are new to the broadcasts, what I do is when I start out these day text shows with a new book or letter, we consider the biblical books primarily, but also various other ancient texts and documents in our day text shows. So you can look back at the earlier shows on Revelation, the last several I've done, and that will catch you up to where we are with today's reading. But basically at this point, we're reading what is recorded as information from God given to Jesus, who then sent his angels to deliver it to John. And John then wrote down the things that he saw and was presented with. And that's what we call the revelation given to John, but that ultimately came from God through Jesus and the angels. All these different spirit beings that work together for the sole purpose of accomplishing God's will. So you have God the Father and you have the sons of God who work together, but you also have other sons of God, like the one we call Satan or the devil, terms that are descriptive of his character. That is one who resists Jah, who does his own thing, versus someone like Jesus who only does Jah's will because he believes that's the best thing to do, like we do, even though we're not as good as him in doing it, but we try. So we review the material that was written down and given to our earliest Christian believers, the people who actually live with Jesus in when it comes to the best evidence. Some may disagree that same John is the one who received the revelation, but we're not going to get into that because it just says to John, and there's no real reason why we should look beyond that to try to find some other person to whom it was given. It's an interesting question, but that's not our purpose. Our purpose is not to come together to furnish questions for research. We're here to present answers and information specifically from these texts. Any one of you can research whatever you want on your own. And of course, we do take questions. We try to keep it specific to the material. But our goal here is not to send you off trying to figure out who John is, who got this revelation. I'm just giving you a brief summary of the context of the revelation, so you kind of understand its origin and how it was delivered to the one we call John, or refer to as John. And many believe it's the same John that Jesus was one of Jesus' closest, or his closest, in fact, disciple. So again, that's not a question that's meant to distract people who are genuinely interested in the message of these letters and these documents. Who wrote what and specifically what person they were at a given time is not as important as the information. Because number one, we can't verify beyond what I just said about John, unless you're going to get into a detailed discussion about the text of Revelation that goes way beyond what we're here to do. So we're going to focus on what we can clearly understand. I've translated the text, so I'm willing to discuss whatever I've translated and be held accountable for anything, so that we can have some confidence in the text and not be entirely reliant on other people. Although there are plenty of good translations out there that you can use in addition to mine. But we go through the material that I've translated to date. I provide a summary of the best Greek texts that support the revelation in the description below, along with a link to an article I wrote about the reliability of the text of Revelation that goes into more detail about the additional manuscript evidence, other language versions. The Bible, the biblical books, are the best texts that we have, the most credible documents, really, for the most part, in terms of these events, things that they describe and chronicle. So when it comes to the revelation, we have it's more of a, if you don't believe in people like Jesus or God at all, then you're not going to really probably, well, you probably will not take seriously the revelation from the standpoint of it coming from God. So, but we're not here to debate that. I've done some videos on the existence of God and written some articles. You can look those up. Many other people have as well. But if you just don't believe in God, that's okay. You can do that. We believe. So we're going to look at this text from the standpoint of our belief, which we have defended historically and scientifically, and rationally, I would argue. So we're not going to get into that. It's not a question about, well, how do you know the revelation was written by God or given by God or who John is. Those are not, well, it's not what we're here to discuss. You can research that, as I said, on your own. We're going to present information for us to benefit from, hopefully. Some part of this text that was written long ago for people like us who are living in different times, different places, but who go through some of the same things. Excuse me. So let's go ahead and start the reading. Sometimes I'll stop and make an application. Other times I'll just read straight through, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, let's start in verse 7. We're going to read Revelation 2, 7 through 10. Here's what it says. So remember what I said, that basically this is a revelation we believe came from God that was given to Jesus. It actually uses those words, a revelation given to Jesus by God in Revelation 1:1, that Jesus then gave to his servants, who gave it to John, who then wrote it to all the Christians in the different congregations, or at least the primary ones. So we read most of what was said by who was described as the resurrected Jesus. In our earlier readings, we read part of Revelation 1 that described Jesus as this heavenly being with fiery eyes, white head and hair like wool, but white, bronze, burning skin, feet, and likely the rest of his skin as well, and clothed to the chest with a golden belt and a giant two-edged sword. Coming out of his mouth, this is a vision, a metaphor that's used to convey to John that he can, it even says he can strike the earth anywhere he wants, anytime. He has all authority in our view, according to Matthew 28, when Jesus said that after he was raised. Again, in our view. But these texts are consistent with that, is what I'm saying. So, let's take a look at what it says here. And so there's going to be a kind of a change in narrative. Don't get distracted by quotes or things. Let's focus on the message, because I'm not going to get into things like who's speaking when, and not necessarily. At times I will, like I did in the first video where we talked about the first and the last. Excuse me. And I also linked an article in that video's description where I go into further detail about the different speakers in the book of Revelation. So we're going to set that aside, though, and focus on the message. Okay, I'm pointing this out because the Revelation, it's not like a text you can just jump in and start reading. And while you can, and you can understand it, without a little bit of context, you're going to be asking these questions. So I just feel that it's good to go over it a little bit now for a text like this, so that you don't get distracted by those questions as we read through the material. You kind of already understand where the revelation comes from in our view, and according to Revelation 1:1, from God down to John. John may or may not be the same John who lived with Jesus, but it's not an issue. We're not focused on John. We're focused on this revelation, at least if you're doing what I'm doing. So that's why verse 7, it says the one possessing an ear. Why would it say that? I mean, does not everyone possess an ear? Because not everybody hears, even though we have two ears. And I'm guilty of that as well. That's why I can say it so confidently. But I try to remember these things and not maintain a deafness when it comes to listening to the Spirit and to these various historically verifiable or likely true events, right? Because we didn't experience everything in history, but we go based on what history says, and then what we can verify, or what we can show didn't take place, or that it's contradicted. So these are some of the most well-established events in people in terms of their relationship to Jesus and the text through him back all the way to Moses. The whole world changed in the first century, and that's where we are. Either that or right at the end of it. So this is a significant time, just like where we are. The one possessing an ear, that's all of us, must listen to what the Spirit says to the gatherings of Christians. To the one who prevails, I will allow that person to eat from the tree of life, which is in the exclusive garden of God. Like Eden, right? That's pretty much what it's describing there. Now, it may be at this point a garden elsewhere, but Jah barred Adam and Eve's entry back into Eden after they disobeyed him because he knew they would keep choosing bad things and he'd ruin what he gave them, which at that time was the best place for them to be and to cultivate throughout the earth, as he told them. Once that changed, they could no longer do that in the same way from Eden. So they were expelled. And Jah even set up an angelic guardian. So there's no one going to find that. It's gone since the flood. It's been buried under the Persian Gulf waters, at least according to all of the best available information we have from the text and satellite and other geographical information. The one who prevails. Does that sound like the one who just starts to believe? So you come to Jesus. Does that sound like Jesus' disciples? I mean, people might say initially, it depends on how you view them initially in terms of their coming to Jesus and the calling by the Father. But the point is, the word prevail here is not an initial indication of a person's state of acceptance of message. It's a word that expresses a state of endurance and accomplishment. That's the person who's going to eat from the tree of life, which is in the exclusive garden of God. Okay, now that's the last part of yesterday's reading from what he wrote to the congregation in Ephesus. So, but you're going to see, I broke it up this way because, first of all, I try to get a good amount of groupings so we have enough text but not too much. And I think you'll see as we continue through what I've translated that it fits right. We're going to do the same thing today, in fact. I'm going to leave off the very last part. We're going to get into verse 8, which is the message to the gathering of Christians in Smyrna. So that just ended his message to the Ephesian Christians. But we're going to leave off a similar part in the message to the Smyrna Christians, like verse 7, and then we'll pick that up on Monday. You'll see why. Okay, verse 8. To the messenger of the Christians gathered in Smyrna, you must write, the first one and the last one who became dead and who has returned to life says these things. I'm going to stop real briefly here because as most of you know, we talked about this in the first video, I believe, where we considered Revelation 1, 17, 18. And I think I summarized everything there fairly well in the day text video and then in the clip of that part of the day text video that's now the Alpha and the Omega beginning and first and last video, part 1. Because we're going to talk more about it, primarily as we get into Alpha and the Omega texts. But I've already talked about first and last enough, I think. One thing I didn't mention, though, and I will mention here, is that in addition to the fact that the best witness to Revelation, Codex A, differentiates both Revelation 1, 17, 18, and 2, 8, and Revelation 22's use of first and last. It uses firstborn, as I described earlier, in 1:17 and 2:8, 1:17, 18, and 2:8, but first in Revelation 22. And how in Isaiah 44:6, Jah uses the expression ego metatauta. But in the first part, so it's different, obviously, than ha eschatos, which is used in Revelation. But in Isaiah 44:6, I forgot to point this out the other day, it doesn't use the article either for either one. It doesn't use the article before protos. I guess in either one I looked at, either text I looked at of Isaiah 44:6. So, because, and I didn't, of course, there's no need for an article before ego metatauta. But there's no article before protos in Isaiah 44:6. in the text that I reviewed. But there is in Revelation's use of first, right? Ha protos. So there's definitely a specific reference there, limited in both this text, right? Who became dead and returned to life. That's directly connected with the first one and last one of Revelation 2:8. Just like the first one and last one, ha protos kai ha eschatos, is connected with Jesus dying and coming to life and living forever with the keys of death and Hades in 1:17:18. So in both texts, 2:8 and 1:17:18, the first part reads ha protos. And then the second part is kai ha eschatos. So we already know, as we discussed in prior videos, Isaiah 44:6, the second part, where it's often translated the first and the last, is ego metatauta. It's not the same as ha eschatos. Not at all. And one appears to be expressly a title, a term of unique description for Jesus, versus just a description of Jah being the one. There's the totality of gods who exist with him, and there are no others. He is the first one, and there are none after him, in the sense that he consults with them to determine what he's going to do. You can read the whole context and see that that's what he's talking about. And it fits with every single thing else we see as far as him directing the sons of God to do his will, or they don't, and then they become rebellious, resistance. Either way, my point is that the terms are different. We talked about mostly the second part before and the differences in Codex A between 22 and Revelation chapters 1 and 2. But I think it's significant to point out, and I'll probably clip this as part 2, and then we'll just keep going with the series on Alpha and Omega, first and last, beginning and the end, because we have several more texts to do. But it's important to point out here with the first and the last one, used of Jesus, that again, it is specific to his death and resurrection. It doesn't say anything about, like Isaiah 44:6, no other gods. The context is totally different. And it's not just one text. Both 1:17:18 and 2:8 say the same thing in connection with the titles. Ha protos, kai ha eschatos. Isaiah 44:6 doesn't say either one of those. It says protos, kai ego metatauta. And I believe is what the text said. So, or something very similar to that. But it's no article before protos. And the last part is, as we've discussed, ego metatauta, not ha eschatos. Totally different. But they seem the same in translation. So I have to look at the context, make sure other people aren't trying to make a connection. Just like with the I am, right? They make that connection by capitalizing either one or both of the am letters, and the same thing for Exodus and some other texts at times, and then reference them together, and people think, wow, Jesus is calling himself God. Same with first and last. They see it capitalized or reference in Revelation, in NIV or other Bibles, and that make this connection, and Isaiah 44:6, and yet they're different in both respects. The first part, protos versus ha protos. The second part, ego metatauta versus ha eschatos. And the context, no other gods, death and resurrection. and soon after, both uses of first and last for his death and resurrection, as I talked about before. In chapter 3, he calls God his God multiple times in this state, in the same resurrected, glorified state. So that would be inconsistent with Isaiah 44:6, obviously. But we know we're dealing with an exalted Jesus, given the name above every name, Philippians 2, 5 through 11, not for his own glory. He says that repeatedly as well. And Paul makes it clear that that's the teaching, to the glory of God the Father. He's the first and the one whom there is no after. And the I and after this. He's the totality of those things in ways that have to do with his godship without having to consult with anybody. He's the Father. All right, so I think we've covered that very well in terms of the first and the last and the issues that relate or often are brought up in relation to the text in Isaiah 44:6 and here. And so there's no real connection between the uses of first and last. I believe there's another similar expression in Isaiah 45:18 that I looked to as well, but it's not the same either. And I don't believe it uses the article before protos there either, just like 44:6 doesn't. And the second part of the expression is, again, totally different. So I don't see a connection here between these texts, and I wanted to point out the fact that the article, or the non-use of the article in the case of the Isaiah texts, makes that disconnection even more apparent, as does the context, as does the second part, and as does the fact that in our best witness to the text, there is an explicit differentiation between the two uses for Jesus and the one use for God. Although, in all of those cases, it could be an angel speaking or Jesus speaking for God because of the way the revelation is set up. And that's why I encourage you to look at my article. I'll put a link below if I haven't already, since this text today also deals with this first and last. And then again, I'll probably do a clip to include the material we just reviewed, so that that part is also included in the video series. And then we'll add to that the Alpha and the Omega, beginning and the end, that we'll get to later. So we're just setting up the series so we get enough, hopefully, quality videos that'll help people understand the issues better, and they can decide for themselves. Okay, so we've got that out of the way. That's important stuff. We spent some good time with it. Excuse me. I clarified an additional piece of information, or added an additional piece, I should say, to what we discussed previously on first and last. We talked about the Garden of God, Tree of Life, used here either literally or figuratively to show what God is prepared to give to those who prevail. Prevail? Well, we'll find out what that means, but I can tell you this. It's no different from what we read in Matthew 24:12, where Jesus says, "He that endures to the end will be saved." We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to achieve a certain number of things. We just have to show we believe. You show me your belief apart from your works, and I'll show you my belief by my works. James. So that's what we teach. We're not here to teach that your works earn you anything. They show you have faith, that you actually believe these things. And not everyone does. That's okay. You get to choose. We get to choose too, and this is what we choose to do. So let's start with verse 9. We'll read 9 and 10 of the continuing part of the message to the Smyrna Christians, and then we'll stop there. Okay, verse 9. I've become familiar. This is really important stuff. The other stuff was important in a different way. This here is more personal, though. You'll see if you haven't already. I've become familiar with your severe difficulty and your extreme lack of resources or poverty. Remember, in our prior readings, he became familiar with the Ephesian Christians because they couldn't stand evil people, and they put those to the test who claimed to be official representatives. But he said, I checked you out. I've examined you, and this is what I found. Okay, so then he went to the Smyrna Christians. He examined them, became familiar with them, just like when Jah went down, right? He became familiar through the angels of what was happening, or even he himself. We can't speak for Jah in all those ways. But we know that the account speaks of angels and others coming down, visiting Lot, and to make a judgment. Although he had made a judgment previously, so he had checked them out. He just allowed it to go further for Abraham's sake. And his probably concern over Lot, and just Jah's general willingness to do merciful things for those who ask for it. He doesn't have to. We don't even have to be here. Either way, we are. So moving forward, we can recognize that at times, just like a real father would examine his child, we are going to come under Jah's or Jesus' examination. That is a good thing. It's never a bad thing, because that will protect us in ways that will give us what we need if we're really trying to believe. Doing the things that show we have confidence, faith, that we trust. We don't just say these things, but we actually believe we came from the dust. We can recognize the scientific basis for life always coming from life and therefore having to be eternal because we're here now, and the obvious intelligence and everything around us. So from there, we then recognize in history the god Jah, based on all the best textual and archaeological evidence. And that's essentially the summary of why we believe what we do. The same thing with Jesus. If you notice in my series on pre-Christian evidence, right? We are citing texts that people believed before the events occurred. And the dating of most of those are not in question in terms of the text. That's why I use them. So we have confidence in the same way these people did. They had lack of resources. They had severe difficulty. But look at what he says, the rest of verse 9. On the other hand, you actually have more than you need. Or you are rich. And I think we probably do often. But because of the world we live in and the things that we do, it's easy for us to feel like we have a greater need. So he goes on and says, I've also learned about the disrespect toward God by those who keep talking about themselves as if they are Jews, but they're not Jews. To the contrary, they're an assembly or synagogue of Satan. In other words, they're resisting the very things real Jews would do. The same you could say for Christians, if he was talking about them, and maybe in some spiritual sense he is, right? If it's talking about spiritual Jews, like Paul talks about in Romans, then he could be referring to the people in the congregations who are pretending to be spiritual Jews but are not. Or literal Jews who are pretending to be followers of the Mosaic Law and are not. Or other Jews who are pretending to be Jews but are more involved in, say, mystical or different Babylonian arts. Either way, he refers to them as Jews who are not Jews but are actually a part of the gathering of Satan. They resist Jah. All right, verse 10. You must fear none of the things you are about to experience. Watch out. The slanderer. The slanderer. I like that better than the devil because, well, the devil just conjures up too many more graphic images of like a red-skinned, horned, pitchfork demon. And that's not really, I'm sure he can do what he wants in some ways. He could work through a serpent or was serpentine and can take form. He tempted Jesus and took him to the mountain and spoke, does various things. But the slanderer is what he does. He just looks for reasons to accuse people. And he knows he has them because of the things he caused in the beginning. He's basically set up the process by which we get judged. And then he goes out and does it because that allows him to control all of us. He tried to do the same thing to Jesus. If he had gotten him to sin against Jah, he would have. But he didn't get him to sin, and he did things to Jesus anyway that you could only do if he had sinned. You see, Jah will, just like Adam there's no reason for him to have eaten the fruit that Eve gave him. So it had to be held accountable to him. Right? There was no reason. He knew what to do and not to do. He didn't have inherited sin. He simply had an option. Do what I know I'm not supposed to do or what I was told to do, or do what I want to do now because this beautiful woman is talking to me. And that's really the condition many of us are in since then, right? We're humans in their image, and we have weaknesses similar to theirs. Okay, but Jesus didn't do that. In fact, he was put under all that pressure, far more than Adam. And he didn't quit. That's why in our last reading, remember what he says, you do not quit. He went all the way and did not fail Jah. He had no reason to. It was painful. It was great disrespect. But he knew if he did Jah's will, that the glory after that would make this disrespect and physical pain nothing. And every single one of those who did these things to him, do you think they're in a better condition? Of course not. Not if you believe as we do. So he knew that, though. He knew, get through this. Follow Jah. They will fail if they don't do the same. So we have to be focused. We have to do what we're here to do. And that's why he says he's learned about this disrespect. Remember, he was disrespected in front of everybody at the end. And he's the most important one. The firstborn of Jah. So we know where things are going. We know who's in control. That's why in verse 10, you must fear none of the things. But watch out. He's going to throw some of you into prison, and you may be tempted. You'll have severe difficulty for 10 days, which was a long period of time, or certainly if it was as difficult as what he was getting to, 10 days in prison would not be nice. You must be faithful as far as death, and I will give you the prize or crown of life. That's what we're going for. We're going to get that. We are going to get that prize because we're going to go and do the same things, and we're going to stand in confidence and with as much respect for everybody as we can, but not deny the things that we can show are far more likely true than what other people know and what we teach today and all these things like evolution. That's like the least likely, in my view, impossible, but even by their own odds, they'll go to the farthest extreme in the worst direction versus the one that is perfection, right? It happens all the time. Life only comes from life. There's no exception. How about those odds? You must fear none of the things you're about to experience. It's terrible when we go through difficulty. I've gone through it. I'm sure you've all gone through it, maybe worse than me. But I'm still here, right? It wasn't so bad that I couldn't keep going. And even if it gets worse, we're all going to the same place. Even if you live your whole life without any further moment of pain until the end, at the end, you're going to the same place. So it only matters at that point what happens. Because we know we're all going. It's not a question of whether some will die. I mean, there may, in our view, be a time where we get to the point where Jah ends the world of wickedness and we go through into the new world. There's the text in Revelation we'll get to that talks about that. But that, the likelihood that we'll hit that point shouldn't be our focus. Our focus should be the fact that we are going to the same place everyone else has come up and gone to. And so it's that point that's the most important. The point we're in now is the easiest to be in and the most distracting because we're here and we're thinking and we're living. But once we get to the end of this part, you see, it only matters then. Because everything you've done to that point comes to an end. These are the reflections of Solomon as well in Ecclesiastes. But he was right. He knew, he could see. And he understood life and the way it existed since the time of Adam and Eve, because the Messiah, through his line, had not yet come. But now he has. So you must fear none of the things you are about to experience. The Son of God came. And he went through far worse than we'll probably have to go through. Or the same. But he went through it. So, if we have a little pain and we have to go through it, that's more than likely how it's going to be for everybody. Why? Because we're in a world where we choose things that are not right. And we expect to get away with every little thing we've done when we get to that point where we die. Why would that be the case? Maybe. Maybe if we choose the right path to resolve the things we've done wrong. Just like in life, right? When you have a problem with someone and you just let it linger, you let it keep going, or you make it worse, what do you expect? You keep hurting someone, you keep damaging them, you keep taking their things, and all you're doing is committing crime. I'm using me as an example here. Because that's what happens a lot. I deal with people who often just their whole life is crime. I'm just trying to do a normal job and make money, you know what I'm saying? And they look at me like I'm a bad person because I don't help them steal. And I'm like, well, you know what? You know what would really help you? A job. What would really help you is if you just went to work for someone who's not a liar, a thief, and otherwise criminal. Because that's the weakest, worst person you could be around. They're just going to bring you down. You think you're the exception to their crime? They put their whole family on the line. They're not going to think twice about you, except about how they can get rid of you once you do what they want you to do. So we have to be cautious, right? I mean, but that's so odd. We're trying to do what's right and be good. We're not perfect. But we have people, they're not even trying. And then you're trying, they're like, what are you doing? Oh, I don't know, I'm trying. What are you doing? Not trying? Well, try. Maybe you should try. Maybe you wouldn't have to do that much crime to survive. Maybe you'd actually be happier in life. Doesn't seem to me that all these criminals are very happy. How could they be? Constantly having to watch out for all their crime. No one's proud about every single thing we've done, but who wants to go through life like that? Always worried about getting caught for your crime. Yeah, that's terrible. Believe me, I'm helping criminals. They may see it differently. I see it like this. I see it like doing the right thing no matter what it takes, because we're all going to the same place. And it only matters what happens when we get there. Of course, everything we do now is important because it leads to that end. And that's why we have to prevail. Verse 7 to the end. Verse 10. Prize of life. Crown of life. I want that prize. That's a prize we can have. That's a prize being offered to us. And in fact, verse 7 says that this prize involves the exclusive garden of God. Have you ever wanted to visit Eden? I'd like to go down below the Persian Gulf right now. Of course, in like a protected vehicle or sufficient diving gear. But my point is, I wouldn't be able to really enjoy it, right, under all that water, even if I could find it, in some way, like things. I wouldn't be able to do anything down there. It's underwater. But there, in that garden, I don't think it's underwater, so we'll probably be all right. Either way, these are the things held out for us. So we already have to go through life. I try to go through mine using the best reasons. I believe the biblical histories and texts from Genesis to Revelation and other writings, many of which we no longer have but do not need, because we have more than we need, and it has everything we need. And that is really three things to me: belief in Jah, acceptance of Jesus as the one he sent, and treating others the way we want to be treated. That's it. Everything else is up to you. I'm not saying it's not important, but we're not here to tell you what to do. We want you to win. We want you to be careful, so if you're thrown into prison, you're able to survive severe difficulty. Some of us have severe difficulty and temptation throughout the earth, whereas in places like where I am, it's more a different type of temptation in ways involving things like the flesh or entertainment. And so we all have difficulties. Some are just different than others. Remember the Ephesian Christians. Look at what was their main difficulty. Evil people. People who were claiming to be official representatives and lying. The Smyrna Christians had poverty. They were around Jews, spiritual or literal, who were really followers of Satan, resisting the message. And they were being thrown into prison, or about to. So we're going to get to the other messages to the other Christians, and you'll see the things said to them. We'll read just one last part of the Smyrna Christian message on Monday. But I like these texts because I think we often have read them either as part of the Watchtower or other groups where it's not as clear when you just sit down and read through it. I think the way we're grouping it, so that it just is like a letter or someone giving you a message, and then you have to decide whether it's credible or whether to act on it. So tomorrow, normally on Sundays I do a CW Jod Talk show or open session where we talk like last week about different things. So I'm going to take tomorrow off. I have a few things I need to do and spend some time, of course, with my kids, which I do, but I want to spend a little more time and just prepare, get some other things done. I have a lot of work to do. Give people time to review some of the other videos. I'm still considering doing a garbage dump. My youngest son saw Spider-Man Far From Home, and he said, I saw a couple things in the trailer. I think I mentioned this on a video, but I didn't see a lot. But he said that the Mysterio character has pyramids on his palms with eyes, like the all-seeing eye, kind of like on the back of the dollar bill. But I haven't seen that yet, and I haven't seen anyone mention that. And so I'm curious to see whether that's an obvious thing, but he noticed it. So I may have to go see Far From Home if there's that kind of symbolism in it, and I can do a credible video and point out some useful stuff. Otherwise, I'm going to just take it easy the rest of this weekend. I'll be back Monday. We'll continue through the text of Revelation, and then next Sunday we'll do Open Session 7. And I'm probably going to introduce the show on the uses of blood. Someone had requested a show on blood. I may even do a CW Jod Talk on the Watchtower and the use of blood. It's a big issue, and the Watchtower has obviously made it a big issue for them. I try not to do a lot about that, only because I think everyone has to choose, and I've already written and done some things, but maybe it's time to get back and do a little more. Definitely do more on blood as a general topic in terms of the Bible and modern medical science, what blood is, what it's used for. So I think I may introduce the open session next Sunday. You know, sometimes with the open sessions, I'll start it off with a topic, and then I'll just go with the flow of the show. So at this point, I'm thinking I'm going to introduce the show next Sunday on the uses of blood. Maybe not specific to the Watchtower, but maybe. But I'm toying with the idea of a separate show on that, so that's why I'm not sure. But that's my preliminary plan for the next week or so. I look forward to getting together with some of you here in chat or otherwise, messages. I'll try to catch up. I think I'm fairly well caught up, and I can't respond to everything. I hope you all know. So I do my best, but I have to move on at times, and then we'll see what comes with other material. But I try to deal with things that I think are important and that are related at least to what we're trying to do here. And if you have any ideas or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. No show tomorrow unless I do a live stream or upload a video, and I probably will upload some videos. But otherwise, I'll put a live stream notice for Monday and the continuation of our day text readings in the book of Revelation.